Greetings, Jelly Spoons, and welcome to part 9 of the OC story that you guys have been voting for in the comments down below to see what happens. You guys started this story out over on Patreon where you voted for different characteristics. We created a main character, we've made a second one. You guys have been voting for where the story goes, and now here we are at part number 9. I've decided, as a lot of you actually DM'd and talked to me about this over the last couple of weeks, I've decided to keep this as an audio format only, partly because next year I'm hoping to finish producing my podcast, The Black Dog, and I really need some practice doing audio editing, but also because I'd quite like to post this as a practice podcast. So this story, plus a few of my other short written works, I'm going to be recording those, posting them onto the YouTube as well, but I'm going to try and put them onto some audio sites, some podcasty ones. We'll see how this goes. If you've got any suggestions or recommendations, chuck them in the comments down below. I could read some of my fics, that kind of thing. But in the meantime, let's crack on with part number 9. So where did the story leave off last time? Well, we left Prince Erasmus and Darrow the assassin in an abandoned house. Darrow had just woken up in the prince's arms from where he had been unconscious for several days, the prince trying his best to heal his wounds and look after him. Darrow opened his eyes, turned to look up at Prince Erasmus, and the first words out of his mouth were, "Hi, beautiful." And now we're going to continue, and the story starts with what you guys voted for in the comments on the last episode. You guys had 3 options, and as usual, you chose secret option number 4, which was all of the above. What were the options I gave you then? Well, one of them was that Prince Erasmus would ask Darrow to teach him how to fight properly, so that he can stop Darrow from ever getting injured again, or at least pull his weight in a fight. The other options included Darrow being asked about his scars by Prince Erasmus. He'd seen some strange scars going all the way down his shoulder blades to his spine. Old scars, faded scars, but gnarly and glistening, a bit like Erasmus had noticed Darrow's blood. The third option was that Darrow would be kissed. Overcome with emotion from Darrow waking up, Prince Erasmus would just pull him up and kiss him. And well, you guys chose all of the above, so here we go. And Patreons, hold tight because your vote is coming in a little bit later. There is barely a moment between them to draw breath. Pale eyes stare up into dark ones, and then the prince's hands are scooping up the back of Darrow's head, full of that long pale hair as he pulls the man's face towards him, and then they're kissing again. There's no rain surrounding them this time, no dark, no cold, no thunderstorm. They're warm, they're dry, and this moment belongs to them and them alone. This time, it's not as long and languid as it was in the carriage in the middle of the night. This one is more urgent, desperate, clamouring, clinging to each other, clinging to those feelings and those thoughts that they do not actually wish to say yet, but they can communicate them wordlessly now. Slowly, bit by bit, they come back to the world. Pulling apart just enough to brush their noses again, resting their foreheads against each other. They take slow, solid breaths of the musty air around them. And they stay like that for a long time. It echoes the first time they'd kissed back in the carriage. A long time of just breathing in the same air, looking at each other as their eyes begin to open. Smiles creeping onto both faces, but no words just yet. There are so many things that both of them want to say, but the idea of speaking it out loud just doesn't occur to them yet. It's comfortable. It's quiet. They can stay like this and be content for a little while longer. So they do. The day slowly folds into evening and then into night, and Darrow, regaining his strength, manages to sit up enough to drink and eat some of the morsels that the prince has found scattered around the abandoned house. He looks around him, and the two discuss what had happened. Erasmus has a request to make, and when Darrow has sat up enough to listen, he makes it. "I want you to teach me, Darrow. Teach me how to fight. Properly, I mean. I learned some skills in my youth, but not enough. Not enough by far. I cannot have faced someone like you did, and I cannot have another few days like this. It was torment knowing I could do nothing for you but try to heal your wounds. I want to be able to prevent them from happening in the first place. Please, teach me what you can." Darrow looked at him for a long moment, and they both knew that the assassin wanted to deny him, to say no, to say he didn't want the prince to ever stoop to his world, to ever become anything like him. But, in truth, they also both knew that it was a necessity at this point. The assassin nodded his head, and trying to make light of the situation, he added, "Well, I guess if you are a criminal now, probably should learn how to defend yourself. Fuck. Yeah. No, you're right. Come on then. Let's show you some stuff." The prince was both startled and delighted at this. "But Darrow, you need more rest. Please." "No, I've rested enough. Come on, I'm going crazy. Let me just show you a few basic bits. I won't do much, promise. No strenuous exercise or whatever. Come on, stand up. Let's see what you can do, huh?" It was strange. The prince was screaming in the back of his head to make Darrow sit back down again, to lie down, to rest properly. Hell, they should probably leave the kitchen come workshop. They should find comfier places to sit and rest and relax in the bedroom come study come library come living room come utter shit heap of things next door. But he couldn't bring himself to do it. There was something in him that couldn't quite deny Darrow anything. He wondered if there was anything he could deny the assassin. He hoped he never had to find out what that might be. So they began to practice, and the prince soon realised that the fencing lessons he'd had in his youth were nothing compared to learning how to truly fight. In a fight for your life, Darrow taught him, rules went completely out of the window. You did not have to keep your guard, hold your stance, or anything. It was life on the line. It was kill or be killed. You could fight dirty, and it was almost better to be the first to do so. Alright, so imagine I'm coming at you. I'm going to stab you from right here, so you bring your blade up and... yeah, just like that. Now do it quicker. Yep, now again. And again. And what if I come at you from this direction? Change it. Yeah. They spent a good, happy 20 minutes or so, which was at least 10 minutes longer than the prince had intended, practicing this move, from different directions, over and over again. After they had finished and Darrow took the blades back, the two of them pottered around the little house some more. They explored and carefully covered the windows in case anyone should look inside, dusted off the tabletops and the counters, and they found a squidgy bed covered in blankets in the corner of the other room. It was Darrow who insisted they both share it. They discovered a few more scraps of food too, fruit that was dried and hadn't quite gone off yet, some old rinds of bread and some hunks of cheese, and they managed to cobble themselves together just enough so their stomachs stopped growling. They settled in under the blankets and curled together for the evening, and, just for a moment, there were a few more kisses exchanged before they fell asleep for the evening. Over the next few days, it was quickly and easily decided that any items they had left behind in the tavern would now be completely abandoned. They could not risk going back for anything, and anything they really prized had been on their person anyway. The real problem was food. The few morsels they'd been able to scrounge together in the abandoned house had rapidly run out, and while there was running water to drink, food was becoming a real problem. They would have to leave the house to go and steal some or buy some, and they would have to do it quickly. They bickered in a pleasant sort of way about who should go to get the food. Darrow wanted to sneak out, go and buy some or steal some, but the prince didn't want him going alone. He was still healing after all. Darrow also wasn't too keen on leaving the prince by himself anywhere. He also didn't want the prince going out by himself just yet. He may still be recognised after all, even with the darker hair. And Maximus knew what they both looked like, and that was an even more pressing danger. Eventually, they decided to go together. They would slip unnoticed through the city streets, purchase some food, and sneak back. And the first day, they managed it. The second day, however, when they approached the market, they spotted some of Maximus's men roaming around, and they turned back and made do with the scraps of what they had left from the previous day. On the third day, it rained, hard and heavy, and everything was shut down. The market completely washed out with water and puddles. It was strangely pleasant, though, because that day Darrow took one look outside, saw that the market would be closed, took Prince Erasmus by the hand, led him back through the two small, musty rooms and into that bedroom. He pulled him back into bed, grabbing the sheets, dragging them over both of their heads and curling into the man. And they stayed twisted together for the rest of the day. And it was, strangely, one of the happiest moments of the prince's life so far. A few days after the washout rainstorm, they struck gold. Darrow and the prince noticed out of the window, down the street, right on the corner, that the park garden was now bearing fruit. Almost every single tree blossoming with riches of gold and green and red and pinks, and everyone in the town seemed to be picking them. It was a free-for-all, it seemed. And so, waiting for a quiet moment, they took their chance, slipping down the street with their hoods raised, and they went and picked armfuls of all the different colours, carrying them back and slipping into the abandoned house without anyone seeing them. They feasted like fruitful kings for another 4 days after that. Darrow did not bring up the subject of training the prince to fight again, but after they had feasted properly and he'd regained a great deal of his strength, he felt that he should. He couldn't put it off anymore. He didn't know what he was trying to protect the prince from, perhaps himself, in a way. Training him to fight made sense. It was sensible, it would save his life, it would help them both, but he didn't want the prince to know everything. He didn't want the prince to know everything about him. He didn't want the prince to see how he fought and remember what it was that he had spent most of his adult days doing for money. He didn't want the man to be afraid of him. But as he thought back on all their times together, the time they had met, for the first time when he had defended the man, and the second time when he had been about to kill him, he realised slowly that the prince already knew all of this, and he'd chosen to stay regardless. And that spoke great volumes in the silence of Darrow's mind. And it was this nudging feeling of safety that made the assassin pick up his blades again and teach the prince properly. They spent many hours over the next few days as their time together in the little abandoned house rolled into another week, and he taught the prince everything he could think of: how to dodge, how to duck, how to dive, how to fight and defend, and eventually they found a rhythm together. They could work together. They trusted each other and could have each other's backs without even glancing at each other. They could anticipate each other's moves and movements. This could work. Well, for a noble-born pretty boy, you make a damn good criminal. Darrow was smiling again. He'd been doing it more and more recently, and the prince couldn't help but melt into it every time he did. The smile lit up not just Darrow's lips, but his eyes, his whole face. It made him almost glow, although the prince was sure he must be imagining it. Darrow's smile literally lighting him up. It was too corny to think about. But still, though, there it was. A glow, something radiating from him. And it was, every time Darrow smiled, one of those true, proper smiles that seemed now to only be reserved for Prince Erasmus himself, though he rarely let himself think such things. The assassin smiled, and when he looked with those bright blue eyes into the prince's dark ones, his entire skin seemed to crackle into life, radiating this warmth and vibrancy like a sun or a star. But that couldn't be true. That couldn't be. It couldn't. Right? As for Darrow himself, he didn't appear to have noticed anything, and so Prince Erasmus decided not to bring it up just yet. He filed it in the back of his mind, along with those gnarly, glittering scars, and the knowledge that the assassin's blood also glistened. He put the small pieces of a massive jigsaw puzzle into a box at the back of his mind and decided it didn't matter for the moment. Things were good, things were happy, things were simple. They needed to leave the town eventually, but for now it was calm and, well, nice. He was enjoying it too much to really want answers to those questions just yet. And so he lived in their few little stolen moments together in the abandoned, dusty house. just for now. As their time in the abandoned house together drew into its second week, the pair decided to try to explore a little more. They'd found a musty old bathroom with a tiny shower and a little toilet. They'd explored every cupboard, every nook and cranny, every book on the shelves, every blanket, every page, everything. But something was niggling at them. And the question was, why? Why was this place abandoned? And with everything in it? It didn't seem like the occupants had taken much with them at all. There weren't many personal items, no photographs, no amulets, items, coins that they could find, nothing that would be seen as jewellery or personal. But they hadn't taken much else. The tools in the workshop, everything was still there. And they began to poke around. And while they were poking around, they discovered what the workshop had been used for. They found bits and pieces of ornate, carved musical instruments. Pieces for guitar strings, pieces for bows, and eventually they found an old and dusty, very nearly complete violin. Erasmus picked it up, blowing the dust off and staring at it. It was carved ornately. It had designs for animals and leaves going up one side. It looked as if it was probably a commission never completed. It was missing one string and it was desperately out of tune. The prince plucked at it sadly. I would love to learn an instrument one day. Perhaps the piano. I always loved listening to those who could play the classical pieces, just tapping away on the keys and making it echo through the halls. Gosh, I could listen for hours. Can you play anything, Darrow? The prince was half expecting the assassin to scoff and say no, but to his surprise, Darrow reached out and took the violin. They'd found several bows all over the place, and he took one in his hands, and as he turned on the spot, eyes closed and concentrating, he began to tune the instrument. It was slightly painful on the ears for a moment or two, the screeching, squeaky, scratching noise of a violin that had never really been played and was absolutely out of key. But when he finally had it, he plucked a few notes to test, and that smile lit up his face again. Prince Erasmus settled himself on their bed to watch the man, as Darrow stood in the middle of the scrappy, scruffy living room that was now completely devoid of dust thanks to the two of them, and began to play. He played soft and slow, concentrating hard. Occasionally he'd drop or miss a note, but on the whole the melody was still there. It was a song that you would sing to children. The prince felt as though he may have heard it once upon a time. It was simple, it was quiet, it was short, but as Darrow played on, repeating the song over and over again, the simple, quiet refrain round and round, he got better and better. And eventually he missed fewer and fewer notes until he could play the song over and over, speeding up until it was at its proper tempo. It sounded sweet in the darkening room, and the prince couldn't help but smile back. And as the dark settled in around them, he knew for certain that Darrow, with his own smile, was definitely glowing like starlight. When did you learn how to play? Who taught you? The prince asked, as Darrow finished playing, set the violin down carefully by the bed, and came to rest by the prince's side. On the road, when I was a kid, he said simply. Not much to do when you're travelling around, so you teach each other languages, learn stuff, and yeah. Some guy had a violin, taught me. Not for long though, I only know about 2 songs, maybe 2.5 if I really tried. I haven't played for years though, so rusty as hell. You should bring it, the prince said. What? The violin. You should bring it with us. Don't be daft. What am I going to do with the violin? Play it, the prince said, and it was his turn to speak simply now. Play it. You're good, Darrow. And with time you can get even better. I would enjoy listening to you. Perhaps one day if I learn how to play the piano we can duet together sometime. Darrow looked at him for a while, confusion changing rapidly on his face to something akin to admiration. No, that wasn't it. The prince was reading it wrong. It wasn't admiration, it was something else he couldn't quite place. Darrow smiled again. Alright. I'll bring it with us, but if we start going hungry, I'm pawning it for cash. Alright? Deal? Alright. Deal. But we'll call that our Plan C, yes? Alright, Plan C. And Darrow leaned in and kissed the prince. It was becoming easier and easier to do, like it was something they just did now. Steal moments and kisses from each other without question, without thought. It just happened. It was natural. It was as easy as breathing. It was like, hey, what's that? Darrow interrupted the prince's train of thought. They both turned to look. Darrow was staring at a patch of wall. It had been half covered by a ragged old tapestry, a small one pinned into place. But as the wind gusting through from one of the broken windows hit it, a small crack was illuminated. Darrow crawled across the prince's lap and went to place his hand on the wall. The prince scurried after him. No fucking way. What is it? Go on, press it. Press it with your hand, right there. What do you mean, Darrow? Just do it, go on. And the two of them placed their hands onto the crack in the wall, and as the prince pushed, Darrow joined him, and the wall moved. The wall parted, and they could see into a small, narrow tunnel, just tall enough to walk in if you stooped a little. There was a light at the far, far end, but it looked like it was maybe half a mile away. Two pairs of eager eyes turned to look at each other, and without a word, both of them grabbed their small packs of belongings and hurried into the tunnel, after adventure. They squeezed the wall shut behind them, just enough that they could still get back out again, but if anyone were to come into the house, they would not see the entrance. And Darrow leading the way, they picked their way, stooping through this dark, dusty tunnel. It wound on, and eventually they came out at the other end. The light they had seen was a small torch flickering in a bracket. It had nearly run all the way down to the bones, but they managed to add a few scraps of fabric and wood to it to keep the blaze going. Darrow took it out of the bracket on the wall and held it aloft as they looked around. The smell slowly seeped into their nostrils, and they realised, looking around, where this tunnel was going to lead them. The sewer system. They must be right under the town. And as they picked their way deftly down and down, they saw more tunnels emerging out of the gloom. They could go in almost any direction they chose. But they decided to stick on this side of the, let's call it a river, for now. The smell was not too pungent just here, the water was at a quite low volume, but as they rounded more corners and kept going, they saw that it would get deeper and deeper, and the smell became stronger and stronger. And quietly, both men decided firmly that they were not going to fall in at any cost. It was perhaps 4 or 5 corners later, when the path they were walking on opened out just a little more, and they found the remains of what looked like a campsite. There were old bits of bedding and clothing, some remnants of food, and the remains of a fire. In the fire, there was a scrap piece of paper, almost burnt out, but they could just about make out the writing. It was a hastily scribbled letter. All it said was this: "Maximus found out. He's coming. Run!" Well, guess that clears a few things up. Darrow folded the letter and placed it back into the fire pit. He looked up at Prince Erasmus. Guess they're on the run from the same bastard we are. Think they made it out? I hope so. Erasmus looked around. I don't see any sign of a struggle or blood, I suppose, and it didn't look as though anyone found their hidden exit. You're an optimist, pretty boy. I like that. Yeah. You're right, though. There's no blood. No one found their way down here. I reckon they could be miles ahead of us. Days, even. Yeah, let's go with that. They survived. They're alright. Maximus is still pissed. Hell, he'd definitely be pissed now, looking for both of us. Ha! Let's press on though, yeah? This place fucking stinks. Agreed. Perhaps this way? They turned another corner and kept on going. They walked and walked for a long time. As they walked, they occasionally would talk about things that came to their minds. Sometimes the smell, sometimes a joke about the smell, sometimes just other bits and pieces. The prince again had this nagging feeling that he should just ask Darrow, ask him about the scars on his back, ask him about why his blood was shimmery, ask him about why, when he smiled, he shimmered too. But he didn't. He couldn't explain why, even to himself. He just didn't. And he didn't talk about it all the way out of the sewers. They twisted and turned, chose a few paths, had to hop across one particularly narrow part, but eventually they found a path that led upwards, and upwards, and upwards. It sloped and got smaller and narrower, and then there was a rusty old ladder to climb. And soon they were breaking out of what looked like almost a well, and they came out into daylight, afternoon daylight. And they were in a misty, foggy patch of trees, in a forest, somewhere far outside the town. They decided to make the most of the daylight and press on, putting as much distance between them and the well as possible, as much distance between them and the entrance to the sewer as possible, as much distance between them and that town as possible. Some of it had been pleasant, beautiful even, but Maximus was still there. His henchmen were still there, and they wanted to be as far away from that as they could be. So they did continue on, through the trees and upwards, upwards and upwards onto this mountain, a beautiful foresty mountain where they could see the smoky mist rippling. There was a river off in the distance, a small stream nearby where they could get fresh water, and a decent patch of flat ground. They decided to build a makeshift camp with the remaining light they had, and then set a fire. They didn't want to freeze, but they were very aware that a fire could draw attention to them, so they buried it. They made a deep pit, surrounded it with rocks and roots, and lit their fire there, building their encampment around it, so that while the smoke could be seen, the fire itself should be hidden. And as the darkness crept in, the smoke itself settled into the mist and swirled into nothingness. No one should have seen where they were. And yet, after they had eaten some handfuls of berries and the remains of the fruit they had brought with them, they heard a step, and then another. A gentle step, a light step. It almost sounded like wind in the trees. Darrow was on his feet in an instant, both blades drawn out, listening intently and looking around. The prince rose slowly behind him, holding on to his own small blade they had found in the workshop, and looking left and right. The footsteps stopped for just a moment or two, and then started up again, closer and closer, until a shape emerged on the other side of their fire, into the light. It was a woman. A tall, willowy woman who looked as if she could almost flit in and out of the trees themselves. Her long, dark hair was streaked with green and bits of bird feather. Her garments were woven of leaves and mosses. And her eyes. This woman had exactly the same eyes as Darrow. And that is where I'm going to leave you for today. Here are your 3 options to vote for in the comments down below for part number 10. Option number 1. There is an argument, a huge heated row between Darrow and this woman. Option number 2. There might be some awkwardness at first, but ultimately there is a heartfelt and sweet reunion between Darrow and this woman. And option number 3. Darrow refuses to speak to this woman, and it's Prince Erasmus who ends up having to communicate with her. Let me know what you want to happen in the comments down below, and as always, if you have any other thoughts or suggestions, chuck those in as well. And 3 guesses who this woman might be. The Patreons know, because they voted for her to appear. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for joining in with me today. Have a wonderful rest of your week. Goodbye!